Okay, I understand from Jonas that you've been having a warm-up on some of these agents which are around on the internet. And maybe you've actually seen some agents that are a bit more advanced than the ones I'm going to talk about. But we can still ask the question whether what I'm going to talk about still is true of those that you have been able to play around with. We'll see. So the topic is comparing what artificial embodied agents can do with what humans can do when they communicate. So, well, you know, you've been looking at some of these things. There is a lot of new communication technology, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Tweet. There is also a lot of development called things like the Semantic Web and the Pragmatic Web. Let's see if you know what these things mean. What is the Semantic Web?
Something with rules, maybe?
What?
No, probably not.
Who knows what the Semantic Web is? This is not the kind of stuff you've been talking about, Jonas?
No.
Nope. Okay, so the Semantic Web means that we have a lot of information on the internet in many different languages. And if we can translate these languages into a common underlying conceptual language, we might be able to do queries on the internet where the queries go out to many different languages and get answers, and that translates it back to whatever language you are in. That's one of the uses of the Semantic Web. There are other uses too. You could, for example, draw inferences. So you have data from one place, and then you ask, does it follow, well, what can we derive from this? And then, because you have translated it into some kind of logically, semantically transparent language, you can draw inferences about it. So one very popular such language is called OWL, O-W-L. And that means Ontology Web Language. Anybody ever heard of this? No? Jonas, I suggest we put some of this stuff into this course.
Yeah, I'm taking notes.
Good. Okay, so that means you probably, if you've not heard of the Semantic Web, you've probably never heard of this Pragmatic Web either. But who knows the difference between semantics and pragmatics? You do, don't you? You're smiling maliciously, that means yes. So what in general is the difference?
Semantics basically means by saying something, it's the direct meaning, but pragmatic is indirect meaning.
Well, you take context into account.
Yes.
So you don't give the meaning just independent. In the Semantic Web, you don't take context very much into account.
Yeah.
When you come to the Pragmatic Web, you start to worry about what is this going to be used for? What is the purpose, etc. If you can take things like that into account, into the services you're giving on the internet, then you're coming close to the Pragmatic Web. And there are a number of people who are very engaged in trying to create the Pragmatic Web as well as the Semantic Web. Okay, and the questions we are going to discuss now, in a sense, they could deliver much better artificial embodied communicative agents on the internet if some of the problems which exist in creating the Semantic Web and the Pragmatic Web were solved. But they are not solved yet, as we will see. Well, maybe you'll tell me that they have been solved, we'll see. But I think they're not solved yet. So, in general, when you're looking at these artificial embodied communicative agents, there are the agents which are made in the universities and in the research labs. And they are usually better than the ones that are commercial. But they are better in the sense that they are much more sophisticated. They can do smart things. But they are worse in the sense that they are not robust. They often have problems. They often collapse. And so they cannot really be put up on a large, well, if you want to serve a large number of people consistently over 24 hours, etc. So for that you need maybe simpler mechanisms. And so most of the things probably you've been able to look at on the internet now have been of the commercial kind. Is that right, Jonas? They've been commercial, mostly? But have you been able to give them any access to any kind of more prototype stuff in universities? No. So usually the universities are a bit ahead, but they create things which are not so robust. What we'll be looking at today is something which is robust and commercial. So we're going to look at this. Have you seen this?
Yeah.
Yeah. How many of you have seen it? So at least, at least 4 or 5. That's good. Okay, it's a variant of the same kind of thing you've been looking at before today. And this character, this is the version of Ikea Asana, which exists in Sweden. Notice she has red hair. This is the version which exists where? Huh?
Germany.
You knew that. Very good.
Oh, yeah,
That's right, it's in Germany. Yeah. And I think also Switzerland, maybe? Yeah, something like that. So, okay, so here we have, this is the, but there is actually another version. Where does this exist?
USA.
No, Saudi Arabia. So this is interesting to note because IKEA in general claims that they do not culturally adapt their stuff. But as you can see, they do. So it's they are not telling the truth exactly. So they do culturally adapt it to some extent, but otherwise they're trying to sell Swedish meatballs and Swedish lingonberry all over the world. Okay, another thing we need to talk a little about is the terminology. So I'm talking now about artificial embodied agents. But there are many terms that people have used. One is the term avatar. But strictly speaking, this comes from Hindu religion. Do we have any Hindus in here? No? But do you know that Krishna is an avatar of Vishnu? Nobody ever heard of this? Jesus is an avatar of God. Is that right? I'm not supposed to say that, but that's right. Okay, so if you have something spiritual up there and it sends down something down on earth and that gets incarnated in, incarnated means in meat, so like a person, then that relationship between whatever is up in heaven and sending this character on earth, that character on earth is an avatar. So here, if it represents the user, it's an avatar. But if we are creating an artificial program out on the internet which has nothing to do with me, it's not an avatar. But some people use the word avatar in this general sense, but actually it's incorrect. The real sense is if it represents you and not somebody else. The other terms are all fine, they're all general. So now the very common term, maybe this is getting to be the most common term right now, virtual agent. I think you've seen that? Mm-hmm. Sometimes contrasted with a robot. So if you just have a program which you can see on the internet, it's a virtual agent. Here's another one, this is more for the business world, artificial shopping agent, animated interface agent, embodied conversational agent, interactive character, another one I'm using because I used it in the article I wrote about this, artificial embodied agent. But this term, the one I use, is fairly common, but this one is perhaps, as I said, getting even more common now, virtual agent. They all mean that you have a little computer program which has a human front side. And the word embodied down here is interesting because what about us humans? Are we embodied? Well, we should be if we have a body. So who is it interesting to talk about embodied? Well, exactly for the people who don't have an embodied agent. Namely people who write programs. So for them, when they dress it up with some kind of human front side, it's interesting to call it embodied. Okay? So what we want to do now is we want to have a comparison between human to human, this is supposed to be a funny abbreviation, human to human, with human to artificial embodied agent. And the question I want you to discuss with yourself for a few minutes before we start, what features should we compare regarding communication if we compare human to human with human to artificial agent? What features of communication would it be interesting to compare if we wanted to evaluate the quality of the interaction with the human, with the artificial embodied agent? Okay, so that I want you to warm up a little by thinking about that topic, because that's what the rest of the talk will be about. So discuss with your neighbor just for a few minutes. Okay, let us start again. So we turn around again. Let's hear some of the things that we can compare. Yeah?
We talked about stuff and irony or sarcasm.
Irony and sarcasm. Are the agents capable of irony and sarcasm?
Probably they are not, or metaphors. Or
Metaphors. Are they
specific
capable of...
cultural codes that might mean something.
Can they do cultural differences?
That's something that
You should write all of these down and we'll ask the question again at the end. Anything else? Yeah?
Yeah, all kinds of turn taking and feedback.
Can they do turn taking and feedback? Yeah? What else?
Hesitations, maybe. What do they mean?
Can they do hesitations? What else?
Relevance replies.
Huh?
Relevance replies.
Yeah, relevant replies. Relevance. Can they manage to be relevant? Anything else?
What do you think about nonverbal behaviors?
That's not mutually exclusive with the things we've already talked about. Gestures and so on can be used to realize these things. So, but can they do the gestural part of some? Yeah. Can they can they observe? Can they use vision and can they use both seeing and hearing? Let's ask that question. Is there anything in there? Yeah, in what they produce themselves and in what they were able to perceive from the users that implies that they have multimodality. We'll see. You know, the whole idea here by showing you this picture of Anna, of course, gives you the impression that there is multimodality. There is a face here. Does that play any role in what the character is doing, or is it just a static face there, which is misleading in some sense? We'll ask that question. It's a good question, actually. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
Keeping subjects. We were trying to communicate with the chat boot, and we had one subject, and it couldn't follow because it changed the subject. So I don't know if it's associated with something else.
So do you mean like topic coherence, topic
yes.
cohesion, that kind of thing? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
We talk about that they are not authentic. They could not be authentic in subjective informations. And even like when I say authentic, I mean like a real person. They cannot copy a real person.
So the feelings you are showing me are the feelings you really have. Then you're authentic.
No.
No?
Like
Yes.
you can never a robot can seems to be like give you the impression that he is real.
Yeah.
You know, even by information, what give you cannot be compared with a real human.
But remember that we're looking at artificial embodied agents. Doesn't the word artificial in itself imply something about non-authenticity?
Yes.
So maybe we know from the start that the answer to your question must be no.
Yes.
In some sense, yeah. I mean, when we can produce robots or virtual characters which have emotions and feelings for real, then we can ask the question, are they showing them on the internet? But I mean, we're not there now. We're very far away from that, I would say. Yeah, okay, so now that's good. Now I'll show you the list that I actually used myself when I did this study. So some of the things you managed, or you mentioned, turn management, I think we mentioned that. Communicative functions, speech acts, what functions do the things have? I don't know if anybody mentioned that, but that was one of the things we looked at. Feedback we looked at, somebody mentioned that. Relevance, somebody mentioned. Referential cohesion, that's an aspect of this topic coherence. Change of perspective and co-construction of information we looked at. What all of these things mean, we'll look at examples and we'll discuss. Amount of information and degrees of simultaneous information. Now all the things that you mentioned we did not look at, but those are all interesting aspects. So that's why I asked you to write them down. We'll come back to those. Because we
memorized.
Yeah, good. You can ask those questions actually about some other agents on the internet. So let's start then with turn management. So here is, well, what we're going to do now, by the way, I should tell you that. We're going to compare data from a log of this Anna. No, it's not Anna actually. We are going to look at, sorry, it was a little misleading there. We are studying another agent, namely the agent which is a front end for a big airline. So this is an agent which is giving information about traveling. Okay, but it's similar to the Anna agent, but it's rather a big traveling agent. Okay, and we're going to compare that to data which we recorded in a travel agency here in Gothenburg. Okay, this was real Swedish customers attempting to buy journeys to various parts in the world. And so it's a comparison between human travel agency talk and this user agent travel agency talk, you might say. Okay, so this dialogue starts by C, means that's customer, and AEA means artificial embodied agent. So the agent or the customer just, and I should say also they're typing in, they're not speaking, they're typing in. So the customer types latest time for check-in. And then the agent answers, when you have to be at the airport depends on how you check in, which destination you're traveling to, and how much baggage you have. You will have to be check-in and at gate at the latest 20 minutes before departure. Here on the side you will find information about check-in times and when you can drop off your baggage. Related questions. And then the agent presents clickable options. Where can I check in? Baggage, passports and visa, assistance at the airport, traveling with animals. I am traveling with an e-ticket. What is that? So then the customer does not answer, but clicks on one of these options, right? Where can I check in? Clicks. Okay, and the agent then answers in text. Check-in can be done on your web page by WAP, our mobile portal, or by SMS. On these channels, one can check in at the earliest 22 hours before flight and until 1 hour before departure. Another alternative is to check in at the self-service kiosk at the airport. You can choose a seat until 3 hours before takeoff. On the page here that I have opened for you, here on the side, you will see which alternative is the most suitable. If you would like to know how long before departure you need to be checked in at the latest, click here on the link. Keep in mind that these times are when you travel with SAS, related questions, and then again you get clickable options to internet. Okay, and so then the person clicks, when do I have to be at the airport? Oh no, these are more clickable options. Can I check in on internet or via mobile if I have baggage? Am I traveling with an e-ticket? What is that? Etc. etc. And then help me win a voucher, 500 Swedish crowns, the value is 500 Swedish crowns by answering my 3 questions. Would you like that? Okay, and then you get another clickable option, yes, no. So then the person clicks, what is e-ticket ID? And so you get to travel by e-ticket means that your booking is stored electronically in our booking system without printing a paper ticket, etc., 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 and you get clickable options. Okay, so then you click again, goes on like this. Now we want to compare this to human. So you know now you saw what artificial agent was able to do. Now we look at human-human. So here the agent says, yes, it will be. One can find maybe, okay? And the square brackets means that while the agent is saying one can find, the customer is saying something, that they're overlapping. Customer says, we take it, I believe. The agent says, cheap, down there. Customer says, you think around that time, then I would of course like that, but it depends on the price. So here, that's one excerpt. Here's another excerpt where you have hesitation and interruption. Here you saw an illustration of overlaps. And down here we see the agent hesitating and the customer says, is that direct or does one have to go via Bangkok? So, now the question to you is, what differences and similarities can we see between human-human and human to artificial embodied agent regarding turn management?
The first one was the amount of information that was.
So that's amount of information. Try to talk about turn management.
Human to artificial is there are some terms. So an answer, a question, or vice versa.
Right.
A question, an answer.
And if we want to take it straight off, you can see we don't see any overlaps whatsoever. There are no overlaps. This is very characteristic of human communication. There are no overlaps in this human to agent. There's no hesitation, no interruption. It's completely devoid of that. These are very characteristic features of human-human communication. They are not there. So, a question to you is, do we want to have artificial embodied agents that could have overlaps, hesitation, and interruption? So some people will perhaps say no, and other people will say, yes, we want that, because that's what we humans expect and are used to.
It can help you because it can answer you before you are questioning it. So maybe it's helpful, but I find it not a good thing because I want to say something and I want to say it from the beginning to the end. I don't want that someone overlaps me.
You don't like that?
No.
But if you are subjected to this boring...
Yeah, this is very boring and also cold.
Wouldn't you like to be able to interrupt this
No.
person? Say stop.
I think that this is too long.
Yeah,
a problem.
not too long.
Too much information.
So if we had the possibility of interrupting, then that perhaps would be good.
Maybe something more emotional. This is too cold.
That's another problem. But if we just look at the turn taking, actually having some possibility of interruption might not be a bad thing always. I mean, I agree, perhaps you as a customer don't want to be interrupted by the system, but you would like to be able to interrupt the system.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
This is true.
Right. And also overlap sometimes because, it would be nice to have a system that was able to, we humans are able to hear and talk at the same time. But this system is in no way able to do that. Okay. So that's the first thing we looked at, turn taking, and you can see there are considerable differences. Now I don't know if any of the systems you looked up before I came in were better at turn taking than this. Perhaps they were. I mean, we're seeing a gradual development here where systems are slowly getting better. But let's look at the next thing. So we're going to look at communicative acts. So these are the functions that we have when we talk. For example, we can ask a question, we can make a request, we can make somebody an offer, we can give somebody a compliment. So functions of this type, these are communicative acts. Okay, so here are some, first we start now this time by looking at human-human. So here are some ways in which you can elicit information. And so the agent says, and when did you say back on the 6th? This is actually a question. Okay? Maybe not so easy to understand, but it is a question. And the customer says, yes, And then the agent continues for something like that, back on the 6th or something like that. Agent, let me see. And then customer continues. So you see these things are going into each other. And they still, both parties are able to keep in their memories what's going on. Although they are sort of alternatively contributing to a common content. Which time? Agent, yes, fully booked, but if one leaves on the 6th in the evening from Phuket, then you're in Copenhagen on the 7th in the morning. Okay, so this is the kind of stuff that we humans are able to do when we are trying to get information from each other. So here are some more examples of what humans, the kind of communicative functions humans can do. So agent says, yes, it's a package trip you've seen there. Or, so that's the kind of question. Was it the package trip that you saw? Yes. Or what did you have in mind? No, I think it will be too expensive if we include hotels, so we, yes, you only want the flights. Okay, so you see here how the two parties actually are listening to each other, drawing conclusions very quickly, and they have new functions which are not so easy to put your finger on how they achieve. And now we go back to the artificial agent. Here is a request for information from the customer, followed by a claim containing information assumed to be relevant to the customer by the agent. What do I do if I want to take a dog with me on the trip? So you get a long answer. You can take your cat or dog on board our flights under the condition that you have made a booking and got your request granted in advance. In some cases there are certain restrictions and rules, so please ask when you make your booking, and if necessary, contact the embassies in the relevant countries. I open a page where you can find more information, for example, about prices. Note that other rules apply if you do not travel with your dog. Contact SAS Cargo or Jetpack for more information related questions. So then you get another list of clickable options. I'm allergic to pets, etc., etc. And here's another question. This is the way you get tired when you have these agents, so you stop asking, you just write commute. This is now a question, query. And so you get another long list here from the agent. And you get, again, you get some clickable options. And then the customer selects one of those. One of the clickable options is travel pass here. So he clicks what is travel pass with or travel pass individual. And here is another one. This time it's a request for information from the agent. So you get a long thing here. Price for overweight is depending on the route. We have different prices for different destinations. I'm opening a page where you will find more detailed information for your actual trip. For certain sporting equipment such as skiing and golfing equipment, there are special fees. We kindly ask you to contact SAS Telesales on the phone number, etc., for more information. Help me get better and win a gift voucher valued 500 Swedish crowns by answering 3 questions. Would you like that? So then you get clickable options. Customer clicks on the option yes, and then the agent comes up with this question, did I help you? And then you get another clickable options, yes or no. Customer clicks, no. And then the agent comes back, will you use me again in the future to answer your questions? In other words, clickable options, yes. So, and then you continue, what can I do better? You get more clickable options, and you get another click, and there's more clickable options, and it goes on like that. So, no, I don't want to give you my contact details. Yes or no, yes. And then you state your name, email, and finally you have to type in your name if you want to be part of this contest that the agent is announcing. Then it stops. Thanks you for your participation. Your views are valuable to us. We'll contact the winners within 2 weeks. please ask me more questions if you want, which I don't think anybody has the strength to do after this. Okay, so here instead we look at agent human. So here is a suggestion how this goes here. Agent, yes, yes. No, you won't find any inexpensive trips from here, like 10 package trips. No, sorry, 10 is just the overlap sign. So like package trips, no, since it's high season, you know. Yes, yes, I understand. But when you come down, if you are, yes, used to traveling, you might perhaps find something, yes. So it's very different kind of mode of interaction. So, what differences and similarities could we see then when it comes to communicative acts? So these are the functions that communication can have. Yeah.
Well, what the difference is when you have a human-to-machine interaction, you usually have it written down, which makes it more stable. You're probably only contacting such a machine or something where you have a serious problem or really need to have a solution. And then it's sometimes more useful to have it written down so you can reread and maybe figure out specific details. And that's sometimes complex when you have just a conversation and you not manage to write everything down.
Does that limit the kind of communicative functions you can have? Does the writing down have a limitation effect in some way?
It has a limitation if you cannot remember everything, all the information like that. And it can limit it as well if you only have it written down and you need it somewhere else. So I think.
But when it comes to the kind of communication functions you can have, you're talking about memory now. That's more the amount of information and so on.
I guess it it takes more turn to accomplish the way H2H does. I mean, you have to go, you have to have more turns to do the same thing that you are doing with the H2H, human to human. I mean, it leads to more turns.
For the human to human?
No, in human to artificial.
There weren't that many turns. Oh, you mean if you look at the clickable options, there were a lot. But when they didn't have clickable options, then there were not many. There were very few, in fact. There were like 2 or 3. But each turn contained a hell of a lot of information.
But in order to get to the, follow-up question, we must interact. Like in a sense, you have in your example, like if I want to go to Paris, the agent never asks, "Oh, well done," or "Good for you." He goes and searches for flights, right? But
here, the agent here sometimes draws conclusions on the basis of what you're saying. It doesn't always consult the computer.
Shouldn't we ask, if I want to go to Paris, which flight should I take?
You might ask that, but you'll see that they sometimes just they will remember what you said a few turns back, and so they will remember you wanted to go on the 6th of February, whatever it was. And then so they will have that in their mind, and then they will come up with a suggestion which is close to that. But that's the kind of thing you will never find actually with the artificial agents, because they have no memory of that sort. Well, you could perhaps make something which had it, but they don't. So even if it's written down, they don't really remember it. They only have what they themselves are saying written down. So, and that's all pre-planned, okay? That's the really big difference. They cannot take context into account at all. They are not pragmatic. Everything is pre-planned. So the designer of this system has to try to think of what are the needs of any customer, and in what order should these needs come up, and what information should you then present. And so they make the mistake here of presenting everything which might be relevant at a certain point. And that means that the communicative functions are not very clear, because actually there are many things which are presented one after another. While if you look at the human-human, they can take context into account all the time flexibly. So you get many different communicative functions in short utterances. Sometimes it's not so easy to see what the function is, because it does take context into account, so you have to know the context. So I think that's the big difference, is that the communicative functions build on context when you have human-human, but so far in these artificial systems they have not been able to create that kind of system. Context-sensitive systems have not really been created in this sense.
There is also another problem.
Namely?
If I ask you how much does it cost to bring with me my dog,
Yeah.
you can answer me, see the allergies of dog. It doesn't matter.
No, but the person who designed this system thought that all information which have to do with bringing along pets should now be brought up for some reason, right? So they're not narrowing down on exactly what the customer wants to know. They're sort of giving a general purpose answer, and they try to get out of that general purpose answer sometimes by having clickable options. So they try to navigate you out of that. Okay, but this is, so the contextual sensitivity is, I think, the big difference in what communicative acts are being produced here. Everything is sort of predetermined in the other system. Okay, let's look at feedback also. So here we have human-human. So agent says, but the problem is to get to Bangkok. It's full. Customer, yes. And then he says yes while the agent is talking. And then customer says yes, yes again here. So a lot of feedback. Agent says, when it comes to domestic, you're almost always fine. And again, the customer comes in and overlaps with the agent, yes. And when the agent is finished talking, yes, the agent. But it's starting to get full, so. The next you can do is on the 9th. It seems pretty okay. So you could try a waiting list and then. So you see, there's a lot of feedback all the time here. So that guides the agent. Is the customer listening? Is the customer understanding? How does this work? Listening, understanding, how does the customer react to the information? Okay, here is more. Now this is back to the artificial agent. Let's look at what might be feedback here. So the artificial agent, help me get better and win a gift voucher valued 500 Swedish crowns by answering 3 questions. Would you like that? Now the agent clicks yes. Is that feedback? Yes. No, well, it's a kind of special feedback. It's actually an answer to a question, right? Or an answer to a request by clicking. It's not the same kind of feedback we looked at before, where it just meant, I hear you, I understand you, continue. Here it's, you're being given a task, a request. Click on if you want this, or yes or no. Did I help you? Yes or no. Will you use me again in the future to answer questions? Yes or no. What do you think I could improve? Booking, check-in, Eurobonus, baggage, other. Click. If you want to take part in the lottery, you'll have to give me your contact details. So you see, all of these, even though they look, when you look superficially, it looks like it's sort of the same kind of feedback, but it isn't. It's all requests which have been pre-prepared by the agent to get a specific kind of information that fits an agenda that the agent has pre-planned. So this is in general that there's no flexibility really in change. You cannot change your plans as you're interacting with the customer. You have a set store of plans, and you need to get specific kinds of information. So this isn't feedback in the same sense as we saw in the human case. So that gives you more or less the answer to this question. What is the difference and similarities between this and, so between the artificial interaction with the artificial agent and human-human when it comes to feedback? All right, what?
No feedback.
Well, there isn't much feedback in the sense that we saw the humans have. You could say that answering yes or no to questions is a kind of feedback. I mean, I agree it is, but it's a kind of, it's only one special kind. Yeah.
You always have to give a feedback, or like a pretty clear feedback, either yes or no.
But
There's no, like when you have a human-human interaction, you can maybe it's not really what I want, but if we adjust this and that,
Right.
but with the machine you can either accept or not accept. And you always have to make a choice if you want to get one step ahead.
Yeah. At least that's the way it is with this system, okay? You might imagine in the future people can build more sophisticated systems where they might be able to treat maybe or answers of that sort. But here they cannot. Here they want, as you said, clear options, yes or no. And that's not really what communicative feedback, the main functions of communicative feedback in normal human communications are slightly different. They are we proceeding together? Can we hear each other? Can we understand each other? Do we like what is being said? That kind of feedback we don't find here very much. Unless, the system could of course ask, do you like what I'm saying? Yes or no? But we don't, I don't know if we have that. Okay, so let's do one more and then we take a break. So we do relevance. So here, when it comes to the agent, what we have a lot of is what I would call globally pre-planned relevance. So somebody, the person who's constructed this system, or the persons who have constructed this system, they have tried to imagine what might be relevant for a person who comes to this site and needs information about traveling. And that's what's put into the system. While a normal travel agent can be more open, and can be more open to exactly what this customer is saying. But here we sort of have to pre-plan what might be the general case for people who come to the site. Okay, so the customer says, how much luggage can I bring from ATL to Stockholm? And so the artificial agent again comes into a fairly long answer. How much baggage you can bring without additional charges depends on what type of ticket you bought and where you're traveling. Read more on the list I've opened here on the side. Related questions, presents clickable options. How much is overweight baggage? Special baggage? Travel with animals? So then the customer comes back. Can I check in 3 bags from ATL to Stockholm if I pay for the 3rd one? And the answer, you have a question about payment. The most common questions about payment is, and then you get clickable options again, is my card charged? Is my booking okay? I have received information that you can't charge money from my account. When do I have to pay? What cards can I pay with? I haven't got a receipt. You have charged my card several times. Can I pay for someone else? Can someone else pay my ticket? Can I purchase my travel by installments? Okay, so here you can see this poor person or per team of people who are making this system. What could the customers come up with? And here you get their idea of that. And that's supposed to be, well, that's the way they treat relevance. They're let's say, using their imagination as much as possible to find what might be relevant problems for customers. Okay, but if we go to the human case, we have what I would call flexible local relevance, which is to some extent influenced by global relevance. But in the case with the artificial agent, we more have global relevance. This is what is relevant for a travel agent in this situation. And you cannot, to the same extent, take into account what the customer wants at that precise moment in the interaction. Here it's the other way around. You can take into account what the customer wants right now, primarily. And secondarily, you have to remember we're in a travel agency, we're not in a pub, we're not in somewhere else. So that, but the sort of relationship between these two things are almost the opposite to each other. Okay, so the customer says, so it should be flights. Agent says, just flights, 2 weeks, or how long? Yes. No, return flight, 5th to 6th of January. agent. So it's just under a month then. 3 weeks something. Customer. 3 weeks approximately, yes. Okay, so you can see how they are adjusting to each other, and the short little remarks make it possible for them to produce a joint understanding of what's going on in this interaction. Okay, so how do you see this? I've already discussed some of the differences, but maybe you can try to summarize some of the differences. How are they different in relevance? Yeah.
Well, from the beginning, the communicative relevance is pretty high when you decide to communicate with an artificial agent, because you usually only contact or start a conversation and you really have a need that makes the communicative act relevant.
Yeah.
And then within the whole procedure, it depends on the programming of the agent. If he or she or it answers your questions in a relevant or in a good way that makes it helpful for you.
Yeah.
And with human is not always relevant.
Yeah. So the main thing is that for the agent you rely on the pre-programmed relevance, you would say.
Yes, and you only contact the machine if you have like a need.
Well, you cannot really, it doesn't have to contact the machine because it has to be programmed. You cannot really, nothing new can in a sense happen.
No, of course not.
Everything has to be in a sense understood in advance. Whatever the programmer has put in advance, that creates the limitations of the system. But when you have human-human interaction, new things can happen. And the agent can go outside, perhaps, of the limitations of being a travel agent. They can bring in resources of having been themselves on a vacation, or they can bring in resources of having been a mother or a father, or something like that, that might be relevant for answering the questions. That cannot happen so far with any artificial embodied agents. They are, all agents of this type so far are domain specific. Do you know what this is? You understand what that means? What does it mean to be domain specific?
Means that only answers to the context of the topic.
Yeah, so it's only about traveling, or it's only about buying on an auction, or it's only about, I don't know, something. You know, it's a specific domain, specific topic activity. That's what you're able to do with an artificial agent so far today. To try to go outside of that is very difficult. Even the most advanced systems, such as Jeopardy, you know this system? You know, they were very proud, I think it was this winter, when an artificial machine, for the first time in history, could beat human beings at the question and answer game Jeopardy. You know what this game is?
Yeah.
The television game? So the first time, I think it was this winter, there was a machine that was able to do better than human beings. Okay, so now they say, okay, machines, they're becoming so great, not better than human beings. But actually, when you look at this more closely, Jeopardy is also a closed domain. You ask a question, you produce instead of answer questions, you produce questions that fit an answer. You know this? Yeah. That's a special technique, which you can program a computer to learn if you train them on a lot of old Jeopardy games. And that's what they did. So again, it's a very special technique which was learned by a computer. If you go outside of the Jeopardy context, that computer won't do well at all. Okay, let's take a short break and we come back. Okay? So let's continue. Okay. I'm going the wrong direction. The next thing we look at is referential cohesion. That means if we talk about the same topic and if we can refer back to what we have already talked about. So here we have the agent and the customer, human-human communication. And the agent, let's see what I have on packages there. All package trips are fully booked as it looks now. In 3 weeks, regular flights is the only option. Customer, agent, and then customer says, is that direct or does one have to fly via Bangkok? What does that refer to? Yeah?
Back.
It refers only to back?
No. Back where?
What does this word, that, what does it refer to?
Ah.
Regular flight.
Yeah, I think so. As it looks now, in 3 weeks, regular flight is the only option. So notice that in human communication we can be very flexible with these little words like, usually they are pronouns. And so the word that here can pick up regular flight. Now let's see what the agent can do. How much luggage can I bring from ATL to Stockholm in January? How much baggage you can bring without additional charges depends on what type of ticket you have bought and where you are traveling. So what is the way that referential cohesion is done here? Actually, this is pretty, in a sense, sophisticated. What is the agent doing here? How do they refer to the same thing between customer and agent here?
He uses some keywords.
Which keyword?
Luggage.
And?
How much?
Yeah.
Or baggage. Luggage and baggage. So he probably, okay, how much luggage can I bring from ATL to Stockholm? How much baggage you can bring? So baggage and luggage. He probably has a list of equivalences, a lookup list, where some central keywords are given. So actually this is unusually sophisticated, I would say. Yeah?
I've been to like an information meeting of a company, a Dropbox,
Yeah?
and they have over 250 million clients,
Yeah?
and they had to change their terms of conditions, and they had to write each of their clients. And then they also had to invent some kind of feedback email address,
Yeah?
because they expected people to answer,
Yeah?
that they knew even if only a small amount of all clients is going to ask something and ask a question or whatever, they are going to have a lot of emails
Right.
to deliver or to analyze. And then they invented, like, they had like a task force that came up with every possible question one could ask or topics they don't
Yeah.
know most likely to be asked.
Yeah?
And then they invented some kind of algorithm that systematically scans all the emails for a specific keyword, and then they managed to like narrow it down into 3 different specific topics, and found a way to like narrow down all the topics just by detecting those referential cohesions.
Yeah, so keywords can be found in different ways. So here they're looking at frequency of certain words, right?
Yes. And
Okay.
the topics.
Here, when they constructed this system, I'm not sure how they did it, but it's not clear that they actually used frequency. They could have just sat down and think, what terms are important for travelers? So you would guess maybe things like baggage and luggage are among the terms you would need. So they could make a list of such terms, and where they had a sense that there might be several terms referring to the same thing, then they can use that, and that's what they're doing here, right? So how much baggage you can bring without additional charges depends on what type of ticket you have bought and where you were traveling. Okay. Yeah, so that's one way they do it. They have a list of equivalences between key terms. But I think there's another way they do it. This is less sophisticated. Here they have, what kind of aeroplane is SK2027? And now the agent says, you have questions regarding flight SK2027. The information I have about this flight is. So what are they doing here?
it takes SK2027 as a keyword.
Yeah, and here it's not even a list of equivalences. Here it's the exact same term, right? And it's repeated. So if you repeat the exact same term, then of course you have a kind of guarantee that you're talking about the same thing. That's a more primitive technique than the one we saw just before, where they at least had two terms which were synonyms. But if you were a human being, what would you do then here? What kind of airplane is SK2027? How would you answer that? Yeah, so what would be a probable, which pronoun could you use?
It is.
It is. But that's what this system cannot do. They don't have that simple mechanisms of going from a noun like, this is a name, you might say, SK2027. So they cannot switch that to the relevant pronoun, which could use the same. I mean, one problem you would have to face then is, when should you switch the name to he? When should you switch it to she? When should you switch it to it? Etc. That's one problem the system would have to be able to analyze. How can it know that SK2027 should not be substituted by he? Well, it cannot know unless there are some rules which tells the system somehow that 2027 is not a possible male person, male whatever, right? This has to be an it. But I'm telling you this because it shows you what kind of difficulties you have to get into if you want to make a system which is more human-like. And that's what you do get into in some of the available more advanced systems that you find in the university prototypes. They try to make such rules, but they are not able to make them here in these commercial settings. Okay, so here is another case of what people can do. The customer says, yes, you also think it will be very high numbers if one is to, and then they say something, and then the agent says, 4, yes, of course. So here they are referring, even by not speaking, they're used speaking elliptically, for 4. So what is that? What could that mean? It's hard to know unless you know the context, but what do you think it could mean? For 4, yes, of course. Well, what could 4 refer to?
The number of the family.
I think it refers to the number of people traveling. So I think this has to do with finding places for 4 people on the plane, right? That's what they're talking about. So for 4, yes, of course. Don't you also think it will be very high numbers if one is to for 4 here? So what could high numbers refer to here? I think it refers to the price. So it's going to be, if you want to. So but it's things like this that they keep this implicit and they don't talk about it explicitly. Human beings are able to do that. These systems cannot do it in any way. So, can you try to summarize what we were just talking about when it comes to referential cohesion? So this is the kind of thing you have to think about if you want to be part of teams designing new artificial agents. And this is a kind of job you might well get if you're studying communication, because there are more and more people around the world who are constructing this kind of systems. So it's a good idea for you to try to think a little about what the problems are. Who wants to try to summarize some of the things we have talked about now? So referential cohesion means how you keep track of what you're talking about. Okay, so what you're referring to. Cohesion means that things are going together. And what means do we have of doing that? Well, we can do it with gestures, we can point to a thing, and then, or we can talk about it. And what we'll be looking at now is various ways that we, through language, can maintain reference to what we're talking about. We can do it by having synonymous terms, we can do it by having the same term repeated, we can do it by switching from a term to some kind of flexible pronoun. And what we've seen is that for the system so far, we can only really see use of the same term once more, or possibly a list with key terms and synonyms. But the other more flexible ways where we use pronouns and more implicit information where we see by what we're saying that we must be referring to same or different things, that's outside the scope of what we can do with artificial agents right now.
So basically every exchange type with the agent is independent from to the other exchange types. Like,
you mean the contributions from the agent and if they're independent of each other?
no. Like I'll say exchange type, not the other term. Every exchange that we make with the agent is independent with the following exchange type that we contribute or that we made.
Well, no,
I mean,
it's not
I ask something, he answers, then I have to ask something. They are quite different.
But if you look here, SK 2027, the agent has picked up this, right?
Okay.
So it's not completely...
I mean, it's the question and answer. Then the second question and answer is independent to the first question and answer.
Usually, yes.
That was what I
Yeah.
meant.
But these two are dependent.
Yeah. Those
Are
are
they all linked through the same term?
No, I was a question and answer. The first question and answer, the second question and answer. I was.
I think it's like that in this system.
In the system, but
And-
not.
But of course, in principle, it doesn't have to be that way in a more sophisticated system. But I think they have not been able to do that any more linking than this kind of linking here. But this is a question of gradual development, and we have, as I said, more sophisticated prototype systems in universities where you can have more linking, right? But it's difficult, and as I said, it's usually domain specific. Okay, we looked at this. And now we have something called change of perspective and co-construction of information. So, customer says, so it should be flights, just the flights. 2 weeks or how long, the agent says. Okay, so notice that they are picking up the same topic. So customer says, so it should be flights. Remember, if you remember part of the conversation before, the person said, we don't want anywhere, we just want the flights, we don't want to live in a specific hotel. So this is following on that. So so it should be flights. Just the flights, 2 weeks or how long? Yes, no. To return flight 5th or 6th of January. So it's just under a month. So how does the agent know that? Well, because the customer has at some earlier point in this conversation said when they want to fly. So the agent remembers that and can now do some inferencing. So it should be just under a month, then 3 weeks or something. 3 weeks approximately, yes. So here they are constructing this content together, and it relies on their memories of what's being said before, and it relies on their abilities to draw inference, to remembering things. So if they wanted to fly then that means that they will stay 3 weeks. Okay, this kind of construction of content together, using also implicit information and inferencing, we don't see it in any of the commercial agents, and we say extremely little of it in also the most advanced prototypes in universities. So here's another one. But if one does not know the price, then it feels yes. No, but we can book it, and you could have the price G. And then I don't finish that. Then you have an open purchase until the price is set. Really? You have that? So that's what we can do in that case. Yeah, but do you have any idea about what company is the cheapest to use, to be the cheapest? So again, you see these words, that here and that case, and we can ask, what do those words refer to? You can have an open purchase until the price is set. So probably, really, you have that. Probably refers to what? Seems difficult for you.
Open purchase.
Yeah, I would say so too. Open purchase. It's more probable that it refers to that than it could also refer to price guarantee, which is swallowing. But I think since he swallowed that, probably he was not able to give a price guarantee, but instead he had an open purchase. So that's what we can do in that case. What does that case apply or refer to?
Yes, you have an open purchase.
I think it refers to a certain kind of option for traveling where you would get that. So it's it refers to a bigger chunk. But you see how these dots float around, and human beings can use them to refer to smaller or bigger parts of the content. And we know, more or less in conversation, what it is referring to by looking at the predication that is made. What are we stating about that which we are referring to? That gives us some idea about what we are referring to. So this is not we human beings are fairly complex in how we do these things, and it's very hard to teach a machine to do it. So this constructing of content together with other people, that's one of the really hardest things to teach a machine. Okay, so here is some more. Yes, is it a package trip you have seen there, or? Yes. Or what did you have in mind? No, I think it will be too expensive if we include hotels. So yes, you only want the flights. Yes, okay. So again, this is an example of inference, right? Where's the inference? I think I'm talking past you. You don't seem to be following. What's the inference?
Like when he says it will be too expensive,
Yeah.
if we include the hotel, then he infers that he wants only the flight.
Exactly. That's the conclusion from that. Yeah, that's exactly the kind of conclusion we're talking about. So package trip also plays a role here. Package probably means a package of flight and hotel, right? So when they hear that, they know that this is what's going on. So it's a package trip you've seen there. Or no, what do you have in mind? No, I think it'll be too expensive. That means he's saying, I think it'll be too expensive to have a package trip if we include hotels. So that's picking out something out of the package. And then the agent says, yes, you only want the flights. So that's what's left in the package. Okay, so we have to have an agent here who's able to understand the word package and that it includes several things, and that you can then refer to the contents of the package, which you're doing here, by talking about the hotel and the journey. and then you can draw conclusions on the basis of it. This is not impossible to do, but it requires a much more sophisticated system. Yeah?
I think it's also interesting to see what kind of conclusions the machine draws. He could also, he obviously reads the machine, but it could also, the program could also answer like, what's your maximum limit you want to spend?
Yeah.
And try to figure out a package
Yes.
that is below that budget, or
Yeah.
you want a cheaper flight or whatever, but the machine already like directly assumes that then only the price.
But again, if the way these systems are done anyway, you would have to figure out in advance that this would be relevant, right? If you wanted to pre-plan everything, which is what the way these systems are done. You couldn't do it online as you're talking to the customer. Then you suddenly see, well, you know, for this customer, it's important to see if there is a maximum price level. For another customer, you might sense that, you know, this person has a lot of money. It's not important at all. They're not interested in the price. They want to know what the journey contains or something like that.
Or like you have to always think about what are the different conclusions you can draw, and then figure the most general one out,
Yeah.
that addresses as many wishes as possible.
That's one way to do it. You know, another way to do it would be to think like this. Maybe there are a limited number of customer types. Maybe we can define poor students, rich capitalists, housewives, etc. Maybe we can find, I don't know, 5 to 10 different customer types. And we can define 5 to 10 different travel scenarios. And different things will be relevant for different customers. And then we could build a more sophisticated system. Okay, the problem will be that this will be more sophisticated. And it will satisfy people. In this the systems we've been looking at so far, there's nothing like that, okay? We're trying to cater for everyone's needs all the time. That's why we get these long lists. But if we did a system like that, where we had different customer types, we might be able to get more flexible. Problem is that compared to the humans, they don't really have, they go by what's being said in the conversation, and they might have many more than 10, right? They might have 20 or whatever. They might have intermediate types. But when we build a system, we will end up with something like a list of 5 or 10. And then, if we do that, we'll have the problem of how do we find out if the customer, the user I'm dealing with right now, which category of user is this? So what should I do? Should I ask you, are you a housewife? Are you a young, poor student? You know, maybe some people will be insulted if you ask questions like that. I don't know. Yes.
Actually,
Yeah, sorry.
I think it's interesting that they are not asking those questions.
No, they are in some systems which are made now in universities.
Okay, but
Yeah.
sometimes if you're doing some kind of survey, then in the end you have to answer those questions for the statistics.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be much easier if Anna would ask me those kind of questions, and then they can narrow down or make
That's
it
one
more
way to do it.
precise?
That's happening now, actually. But what would you want to say?
It would be interesting if these artificial embodied agents could make use of my Facebook profile.
Yeah.
Or maybe it would be very frightening in a sense.
But Big Brother is watching you.
Yeah. To
All of
provide
these-
more contextual information about me, my perhaps travel patterns and
Yeah.
interests and so on.
Yeah. Well, you know, for most of these things where you find out more about people, that can be used for both for plus and for minus. Do we want the government or whoever Big Brother is to keep control of us and to bring up this? Yeah. That seems to be the consequence for much of this information technology, that we get into problems of that sort. With human beings, as you see, we can go utterance by utterance and we can create the context and we can fill in more. That's what machines are not able to do so far.
But actually, even nowadays, when you call the travel agency, they sometimes say, I can see that you haven't filled in a travel profile. So they want also to know more about me, even in the verbal conversation.
That'll make it easier.
Yeah, make it easier, quicker,
Yeah.
perhaps. Yeah.
That's true.
It's interesting. Yeah.
Okay, so we have looked at that. Then we have amount of information. We've talked a lot about that. And we've seen that since they're pre-planning everything and they don't have categories of users, they have to try to cater for everyone. That means that they give extremely long answers where you have to sit patiently and sift through yourself what might be relevant for you. And that, of course, makes you think that this is worthless. And you start to long to work to form to a person where you wouldn't have to go through all this information. So that's a big problem, that there's actually too much information and there's too little relevant selection of information. They don't know how to do that. So here, now for once I'm going to give you the opposite. So here for once is a customer who thinks that they can give the agent a lot of information. So the customer writes, hello, we have booked a trip to Egypt with Apollo. This is a travel agency in Sweden. Booking number, departure date, and return date. Okay, we travel with Nob Air, but back home with SAS. We can pre-book seats with Nob Air, but can't book seats home with SAS. How can we do that? Okay, here's this optimistic person who hopes to get an answer. So the artificial agent then says, it's difficult for me to understand two complex questions. Try to ask one question at a time. If you want, you can also chat with someone at internet support that maybe can help you. Do you want that? Okay, so here, as soon as the game starts to be played on the conditions of the customers, where the agent cannot control everything by having manuscript which is prepared in advance, they have a way out, which is to say, okay, phone someone. Of course, yeah, that's maybe what we feel right from the start. I'd like to phone someone, but I don't have to get into this. So that's a solution if they realize that they cannot do any complex processing. Basically, the whole thing is presupposed on having control over the conversation, in a sense, setting the agenda for the customer all the time, so you know the customer has to do what you plan for them to do. If they try to do something outside of that, you don't, well, then you have this way out. You point to a human person who can answer questions. Okay, so that was amount of information. There is too much in general. And that actually is the same with simultaneous information. You're getting too many things to do. You get too many clickable options and so on. Too little relevant selection. So if we try to summarize what we have talked about. The first thing we did was turn management. The artificial agent has too long turns and cannot handle interruptions and overlap. Communicative functions. The artificial agent cannot handle, perceive, understand, produce implicit communicative functions. The artificial agent can only handle prepared communicative functions, pre-planned. When it comes to feedback, the artificial agent cannot handle adequate communicative feedback as we saw. It's only a very special case, namely answering questions or requests. Communicative relevance. The artificial agent has insufficient relevant adaptation of its answers. The artificial agent will produce the same answer again and again, given particular keywords. We saw that. Referential cohesion. The artificial agent cannot handle referential connections going more than one turn back. Well, that was another thing we didn't look at, but with human beings you can actually remember many turns back. In this system you can only remember one turn back. So you cannot remember what you said 2 turns back. Even this is misunderstood because of superficial keyword dependence. Well, that was another example I forgot to point out to you. But when words superficially resemble each other, they may make a mistake that they are the same thing when they are not. Change of perspective and co-construction of information. The artificial agent cannot change perspective And all code construction is canned and pre-planned. That is, in a sense, presupposes a Leibnizian pre-established harmony between customer and agent. Who is Leibniz? Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz? Ever heard of him? You've heard of him, I hope. You're German. He's a great German philosopher. And he said that we human beings do not have contact with each other. We are monads. Not nomads, but monads. And we don't have any windows. So, when we think we are interacting, we're not interacting. God has planned a big plan for us all to look like we're interacting with each other. This is called pre-established harmony. And these systems behave like Leibniz thought that human beings in general behave. That's probably most of us think that we do interact and we influence each other. But in Leibniz's world, that's not what happened. Okay. And then we have the amount of information. The agent provides too much information in large simultaneous chunks rather than in small relevant incremental chunks guided by feedback. So there's large chunks in the artificial agent here, and human beings, incremental, small, step-by-step chunks. Okay, was that it? Yeah. Okay, so the main advantage of the artificial agent system over the human-to-human communication seems to be lower cost. Okay, so now we can look at, we're providing 24-hour service to the customers. It's open 24 hours. We don't have to pay a human being who's sitting there and answer questions. So we have so-called 24-hour service, lower cost, connected to this increased availability. We're available 24 hours. And we can give information about frequently requested information. That seems to be the main advantage, yeah?
And you can store all the questions that come in quite
Yeah.
easily, and you can get an overview about what is wrong with my product, what stuff people would like to answer,
Yeah.
maybe even have some research on what people are willing to discuss through such a machine.
Right.
Instead of face to face, or if they are willing to share confidential information, or
Yeah. So you can make it gradually better by storing information and giving more answers, frequently answered questions, as they say.
no, not only like improving the whole project, but also gaining important information for your business and the
Okay,
development of
so
the
also,
product.
yeah, you're right. So you can see what people want and so you can sell more things to your customers. That's true. So it's also information gathering. It's not just information providing. It's also information gathering. I agree. So those are some main advantages of these artificial systems over human.
But Jens,
Yeah.
there's a comment here. Seems to be lower costs.
Yeah.
For whom? I mean,
For the companies that sell this to other companies.
yeah.
This is part of their advertising hype, that if you buy this kind of system from us, you will get this product.
But
Lower
it's also,
cost.
it's also a good example of the system you and I sometimes discuss where the cost is pushed to us.
Yeah,
So we have a higher cost.
yeah, that's true. So it's not a lower cost maybe for the customer who sits there and is frustrated.
Yeah.
Because you believe this, that it's very convenient, and you sit there and your computer system breaks down and you don't get the answers you want, etc. So, but it looks good,
Looks good.
for the company that buys this, at least in the beginning. Yeah, but there are many companies that are trying to make money on this kind of systems now. So are the advantages sufficiently large to overcome the drawbacks? Do the artificial agent systems have sufficient potential as service providers to legitimize further development of such agents? If so, the list of deficiencies given above can be seen as a list of challenges to meet and overcome. What is your opinion? Is this a good thing? No nobody has any opinion.
I have opinions.
Yeah?
On the first question, I would say the advantages are not sufficiently larger. But on the other question, I would say yes, we should continue to develop it. But currently, I wouldn't, as a company, risk my reputation by having a poorly designed agent represent my company.
You would?
I wouldn't. I wouldn't face that risk. But I wouldn't take that risk.
You have a different opinion?
No, I agree with him, and I think when I need the help of a customer service somehow, I usually, then it's a very complex problem. Because usually, even before I enter the company's website and search for frequently asked questions, I usually Google, because there are always stupid people outside that already had the same problem and want some answers.
Yeah.
And it has to be very specific if I want to work with, if I'm really searching for the company to help me. And then it's so complex that probably the machine wouldn't be able to help me, and then I would call them anyway. So I don't really see the need for such a guide.
Question is, if there is enough money around to continue development, if there are not commercial systems being sold in this way. Maybe this development would not really be possible unless they were able to try out these systems that are not so good.
Fair comment.
Well, I don't know. But that, and then you have to think, well, maybe we would be better off without these systems. But the world is not such. The world is such that we are continuing to develop these systems at the moment, and it doesn't seem to be a realistic option, really, to try to stop it. I say, unfortunately, because I'm not a great enthusiast, but I think you are, right?
Yeah, not more than you, but I'm also not happy with the current situation.
No. So I want to end with this question for you, which you can take home, but it's a very short question. What abilities would you like to see in an artificial embodied agent, given that you now understand a little about the problems there are in developing better agents? Do you have an answer immediately?
As I said at the beginning today, I want that an AEA must be more emotional.
Yeah.
So it's not so cold and formal as we have seen his answers.
Right.
So
And that's coming. They are developing now, there are prototypes which have more emotions. You had a nice list in the beginning too. Let's hear your list again.
Sarcasm, irony.
They want agents with sarcasm and irony.
Yes, and then there are metaphors and cultural differences.
And they should be able to produce understand and produce metaphors, and they should show some cultural differences. So I think in this list, irony, sarcasm are the most difficult ones. I haven't seen any system so far that do that. Cultural differences, yes, that is coming. I was at a very interesting symposium in Germany only about 3 weeks ago, where we were discussing a lot how to make culturally sensitive agents. So that's coming, and there are several systems available already. But they are mostly tutorial systems, so it's for teaching language and culture. They're not systems like this for Ikea or something like that. But it's something that's being developed. And overall, as I said, there's a lot of money available for this kind of system development right now, in many different directions. And we will have to live with many bad systems in the next 20 years when you see these being tried out on you. Yeah?
And how about people making spelling mistakes or having maybe dyslexia? How do you call it?
Dyslexia?
Like when you change the letters all the time?
Yeah.
Or if you're a multilingual and you don't know a specific word in a specific language, like how can they use stuff like that?
Yeah, so how can you build systems which support such people?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's one of the legitimate questions. And I think, if you thought more deeply on a question like that, you might even be able to get some money to develop a system which did that. But it presupposes that you actually go a little deeply into these questions and understand what the problems are. But the EU, for example, has a lot of money for questions, or for developing systems which take care of that kind of problems. Okay, so now this was a little glimpse into the world of artificial agents. Thank you very much.